And then I'll just start letting people in just as soon as it goes to 12 o'clock. Okay. Hello, everyone. Welcome to our webinar on mastering CIPS constructive exams. I believe we're both on Zoom and LinkedIn live streaming as well. So wherever you're joining us from, or if you're watching this as a recording at a later date, welcome. We're very excited to give you this information in advance of your March exam so you can cross the final hurdle and just get some final revision and tips from the experts. I would just like to also give an acknowledgement of country that I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the various lands on which we work today. For me, that's the Gadigal. And I'd also like to acknowledge Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people participating in this webinar. So, as we kick off, just a short intro. I'm Genevieve Malcolm, and I'm Commercial Director at Academy Global. I also am head of our CIPS Study Centre, so I do oversee our operations there. I will be speaking today with Andres Naranjo, and Andres, I will hand over to you in a second just to give a brief, short overview of yourself.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you, everyone, and thank you very much, Genevieve, for having me today. My name is Andres. I am a procurement nerd, for lack of a better term. I've been in this game for a very long time. I've worked across a number of industries, from government consulting, financial services, infrastructure, construction materials, as well as doing consulting for FMCGs, airlines, restaurants, you name it. And I really love it. And I hope that you are all as excited as I have been for a career in procurement. And today, obviously, we're going to be sharing some tips around how to help you ace those exams that are coming up.
Fantastic. Thanks, Andres. And just to everyone here, the structure of this webinar is that I will run through a series of questions with Andres to start. That'll roughly run for 30 minutes or so. And then we will have around 10 minutes at the end to answer any audience questions as well. So feel free to pop those in the chat if they arise throughout our conversation, and we'll get to those then. So, Andres, I might kick off with a question just around your philosophy and overview on what markers are really looking for in CIPS constructive exams, and maybe to the point of going beyond the textbook answers and just the straight theory that people might be studying from the study guides and the CIPS content and materials.
First, look, it's a very, very important thing to consider that when you're sitting for the exams, there's going to be another person sitting on the other side. And so you don't have the advantage of being able to talk to them. Being concise, but making sure that your response is complete is very important because you're being aware of how that person is then going to absorb the information. So when it comes to, let's call it a philosophy, short, sharp, simple, but complete. And I guess emphasizing the complete, you can miss out things. Likewise, people sometimes get really lengthy answers and they give lots of embellishment and words and phrases that don't necessarily add to the answer. They don't bring any value or any focus, any concept tied into the context of the question. And so it just sort of gets lost in the noise. So when a marker looks at this, they actually don't know where to go and they can't really review them as you would like them to. So better to just say, look, here's an introduction. Here's how I am tying in the text in the question, the context of the question, and the concepts that I'm bringing in. Two, three lines, very clear, very focused, and then of course make sure that it is aligned to the command words, and we'll talk a little bit about that as well. The concept here is, of course, making sure that you understood the question, that you understand the concept and how it applies, and you understand exactly what it is that they're expecting you to say. There's a differing depth of answer expected depending on the command word that is being used. And so your level of detail will also need to adjust to that in order to provide an answer that gets you the best possible marks.
Yeah. And moving on to our next question, and I guess this kind of builds on the what you've just spoken to in terms of the command words. How should candidates interpret complex exam questions effectively under time pressure? And maybe specifically in this, you might want to also think about how people can look at questions that might need them to link to a scenario. And maybe I'm thinking as well, some advice for students on maybe identifying the learning outcome that's being referenced or the material they'll need to draw on from CIPS relating to a specific question.
Absolutely. And I think that that's the key. You hit the nail on the head. You want to know what the learning outcome is, what they're targeting with that question. And for you to be able to do that, you need to understand the learning outcomes yourselves. So probably the most important thing for this exam or for any exam that you sit in life is preparation. This isn't going to be what you're doing on the day. This is going to be what you did in the weeks leading up to the actual exam and the actual day that you're sitting the exam. And so in your preparation, it's sitting down and understanding those learning objectives, understanding the concepts that sit under each one of those learning objectives, the tools that you've been given, and actually applying them back to the learning objective. And what I tell students is a really good tool is to build yourself a map of learning objective, tool, or concept as they're associated to one another. I'm telling you, this should be more like an outline, not like a very deep document. And what you can do with that is you can use it to revise and prepare so that you have that clarity. When you face the question, you know the learning outcome and the tools and resources that apply to that one. But like I said, most of this starts with good preparation. And that preparation isn't just knowing the material, but also understanding the exam itself and the structure of the exam itself. CIPS
Mm.
shares with you previous exams. And so you have the opportunity to review what has been asked before so that you understand the structure, you understand the marking mechanism, you understand the typical length of questions. You will not get the same questions, you're not that lucky, but what you will get is a notion of how the questions tie into the concepts, into the learning objectives, and then how they're marked. And that level of understanding, that level of preparation will give you a lot more calm and focus on the day because you have a general skeleton of the concepts and you have a general skeleton of what the test looks like. So when you sit for it, it's not this brand new thing that you've never ever come
Yeah.
across. And there's also the idea that there's a logistical element to preparing for the exam. So aside from understanding what you need to understand and know the concepts, because this is what you're being graded on in the end, you need to prepare for it physically. It's important to have a good night's sleep, to be
Yeah.
rested, to have had some food, to have had a coffee if you drink coffee or water if you need water, to have been to the bathroom and to then prepare your setup as much as you can. Because the idea is when that clock starts, you got to be ready. So you want people off your modem. So you don't want people streaming or gaming or consuming your resources. If you're going to use your computer, make sure that your computer is completely up to date, that you've restarted it and you've tested it and the bandwidth is working for you, that you have a backup so you can tether off your phone if for whatever reason power went out or anything like that. All these different little things that you do before the exam help you be ready during the exam, to be calm and collected and focused. Because if you didn't have a good night's sleep, you may not be able to focus. If you hadn't had your coffee, you may not be concentrating, you may be a little bit drowsy or tired or whatever. These are seemingly silly things to think about, but what you're trying to do is maximize your capacity as soon as the clock starts and maximize the time that you're going to get. And the less things that you have to worry about before the exam, the better chances you have of performing at your very, very, very best.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point. And I think particularly for the remotely invigilated exams, give yourself that full hour before the exam to sit in the room, make sure it's clear so that when you have to show the examiner all around your room, everything's already prepped. It's fine. There's nothing anywhere that it's going to frustrate the process. Make sure you have chargers for devices as well, so you don't run into an issue where suddenly your computer or your phone device for the invigilation is running out of charge at that point. All these extra things that are just going to stress you out, distract you, and cause your mind to go blank during the exam. It's really important that you think about those so you give yourself the best possible chance in the exam.
And
Um,
that's a really good point. When you think
yeah.
about going blank, sometimes the complexity of the question might
Mm,
seem daunting, right? But
mm,
because we're talking about time management, probably one of the things that you want to be able to do is to have prepared and understood the time that you get for the types of questions. But then when you start the exam, so you're on the go, you're on the clock, you read through the exam and you understand the structure of the questions, how they're going to be marked, maybe help yourself, remind yourself this is according to this particular learning objective, or maybe this, but go through it so you have a gauge of the challenge in front of you. And then pick the questions to tackle first and
yeah.
organize yourself to make sure that you will have enough time to answer as many questions completely and accurately as possible. And so probably the most interesting thing about complex questions is they're usually worth more marks. So if you start with the complex
Yeah.
questions and you start addressing those, you're giving yourself a better chance of getting good marks, such that if you are tight for time towards the end of the exam, you can get through the simpler, shorter, I know this answer really quickly. But if you do get sort of that writer's block and you're kind of stuck on a question, it's never a good idea to just sit on a dwell, because time is not your friend during one of these. So what you want to be able to do is take a moment, take a break, organize your thoughts, go back to the basics. Like I said, what's my
Yeah.
skeleton of learning objectives and tools and concepts? And if you can't really reset yourself from that, take a moment to then tackle something easy, grab some low hanging fruit, answer some short, simple, low mark questions, and then revisit that. But don't just sit there and not write, not try to produce an answer, because it is
Yeah.
literally time being wasted.
Yeah, yeah, completely agree with that. And I would say to people, yeah, do read through the whole exam. So every question before you start writing in response to any question, because you might find, okay, question two, I know that really well, and I can jump in and write a really quick response that's going to hit everything and get maximum marks there. Maybe I'll leave that one that I'm a little less confident with to the end, but I'll still make sure I respond to it. But just make sure you give yourself enough time and you move on when you need to, so that you don't get to a stage where, oh no, I've got 5 minutes to go and I haven't even gotten to this question. I haven't even read it, so I'm not sure what's happening. Because I do think it helps when you just use that initial reading and planning time to set out, okay, if I allocate my time like this question should roughly take me 20 minutes. This one's worth some more marks. Want to spend half an hour there. And then you can follow a bit of a plan to make sure that you do address each question, because it's all well and good if you know one question really well and your response is outstanding for that one. But if you don't give yourself enough time and you have to skip one of the questions, you've just lost all the marks that were going to be awarded for that question. So it's really important that you get across as much as you can and answer every question to the best of your ability in the exam. And that's about time management as well. I might move on to then the next question. And I think we've spoken a little bit around maybe structuring the essay style responses as well. Did you have any more tips on that, Andres, and how to approach and maybe structure your response?
I think probably the most important thing you can do is stay focused. When you read the markers reports from previous years and the markers are going through how the previous exams went and what people did right and what people did wrong, oftentimes you see the comment there that people sort of missed the point. They
Mm,
have provided an answer that was too short or too diffuse. It just didn't focus enough on what needed to be focused on. So structuring these types of essays is relatively simple in that you want to have something that introduces your answer. Usually that introduction can be not a word for word, but a restatement of the question that shows that you're understanding the question, framing then how you're going to answer the question, and then bringing in the concept. So you have that introduction and say, this question is about X, Y, Z, and I'm going to apply ABC concept here, full stop. And then you go into how the concept is applied, what the concept means, depending on the command word that you were given. And the idea is, it doesn't have to be very long. Uh,
Yeah.
Likewise, it should be just one line or two lines, right? What you want to be able is strike a balance, 3 to 5 sentences. Like I said, an introduction, clarity on the concepts, clarity on how they relate to the question and the context that you've been given to show that you not only understand the theory of it, that you can read it off the book and you memorized it, but how that applies to a real world scenario and how you tie in those theoretical concepts with the practical reality of what you are being asked.
Yes. Yep. Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And I think your point as well around reading the question as well. If it says describe five, don't bother spending time describing, six or seven because the marker will stop reading and they won't be able to give you any more marks for extra and you're just wasting valuable exam time. So do read the question. And as you mentioned, Andres, make sure that when you read back your response, which I recommend you do before you do submit and end your exam if you have time, ask yourself, do I address the question? If I was a marker, remember, they don't know you, they don't know your procurement experience, they don't know what's in your mind. So you really are just putting yourself on the paper, and they only have that as their interpretation of how well you know this content. So to give yourself the best possible opportunity at maximizing your marks, you need to make sure that someone reading this can say, yes, I can confidently say this person has addressed this question.
And I think
Just,
that's a
yeah,
really interesting thing that you've touched on, because oftentimes in understanding the questions, you'll understand what is expected of you.
yeah,
As in, if there's a count of concepts, like name the 13 stages of the CIPS procurement cycle. Well, there's 13 things. You get 13 marks. Or if there's name five things and they give you 25 marks for that, and you know each one
yeah.
of those things is worth five. If you give four, you're missing five. If you give 30, you're not going to get extra points. And in fact, you may disadvantage yourself. So just keep it to the actual count that you're being given and in the
Mm,
framework of here's the points that you're being attributed. And that way, you know, you can maximize it. I would say, let's say that you have a mental blank and you remember 4 out of 5 things that you're supposed to put into an answer. It's better to do that because you're going to get those points than to just sit there and dwell. The idea is you go somewhere else and you try to find those 5 points in another question, right? But
mm.
don't sit there and dwell and then overextend yourself and then introduce other possible answers or options that may not be as relevant, that just add length to your answer and make it difficult for the individual to understand and don't demonstrate your knowledge at all because you won't get marked for them. You waste the time and you're probably harming yourself.
Yep, couldn't agree more. And our next question was on time management. I think you've spoken a bit to that as well in terms of how they allocate their time and I guess pacing across the questions and where marks are allocated. So I might move on a little bit to then the preparation strategies and what students should focus on when they're revising. How can students prepare beyond just studying the theory, reading the study guides, reviewing their class materials? What do they really need to be doing in terms of practicing application and structure for the exams?
I think you have a wealth of media available to you. Probably the most important thing, if you're clear on the concepts, and I'm going to start with the assumption that you are, and we can talk about if you're not clear on the concept, then we can certainly help you with some of that stuff.
Mm.
But let's say you're clear on the concept and your theoretical basis is very strong. Checking the previous exams is fundamental, right? They give you an idea of how to answer. Remember, being there on the day, how to answer is everything because hopefully you're clear on the concept. That's where we started off from. So those previous exams are important. Then understanding the command words. There is a very simple table. It's 2 pages long, Jen.
Yes,
Um,
roughly. Yeah.
and it just says when they say analyze, they mean this. When they say describe, they mean this. When they say list, they mean that. And it actually gives you a notion of the escalating level of detail expected depending on what exam you're taking, but also what command word you're being given. So there are subtle differences that are important when providing a complete and accurate answer between one command word and the other. Understand them, understand what they mean, have a little one-liner for each one of those in your mind, and you go, oh, well, they said list, very simple, boom, 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 boom. Here are the 13 stages in the CIPS procurement cycle versus analyze the application of e-procurement systems in this particular case. Very, very different length, very different level of detail. So those are two core things. There are lots of other resources available. If you're interested in getting a little bit more depth, there's videos you can watch, there's materials online, but remember, this is an exam that focuses on the CIPS qualifications. This is not about the work that you have done. You may have had years of experience leading you to this point, and that's wonderful. But the focus is on the CIPS concepts. So make sure that if you're looking for materials or you're leveraging things available online, that they're actually CIPS materials related to the exact level that you're completing. Because otherwise, it's a waste of time, if I'm
Yeah.
perfectly honest. Now, if
Yeah.
you're not clear on the concept, if you are having trouble differentiating one tool or one idea or one concept from the other, from the SIP materials, have a chat to Genevieve and we can hold review sessions.
Yep.
Those are readily available.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. And then it probably leads well into the next question on students focusing really heavily on the knowledge and maybe the theory, but less on how clearly they write. And I guess a bit of an extension on that as well, they might be neglecting to apply their knowledge to scenarios or cases that are given in the exam and interact with the facts there to demonstrate their knowledge as well. So what are some of the skills in this area that students should focus on when developing their skills before the exam?
Look, writing is hopefully something that you're quite comfortable with if you're at this level. Uh, but then what you want to be able to do is seeing sample answers, right? Sample answers give you an idea of length and the vocabulary and the structure. Um, Writing your own answers and then saying, here's me taking the test and doing a mock test in the full sense of the word, where you take the questions of previous exams without the answers. You provide the answers, you time yourself, and then comparing your answer to the answer key that's been provided for previous years is a good measure of testing your writing skills against the expected standard. But of course, you have your tutors, you have your peers, leverage other people where you can. These are always important tools available to you that not often people make the best of, to be perfectly honest.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. And around practicing with those past papers and previous questions, how do you recommend students use them? How frequently would you do it? Where are some of the questions maybe they can create themselves or gain from the study guide, or maybe use some tools to kind of generate some practice examples if they've run out of ones that have been provided in past papers?
Yeah, I think if there are two previous papers, use both of them. If there are three, just everything that you can to beef up those skills. This is like a muscle. And so if you find materials that are relevant within CIPS, that will always help you. One thing that I encourage people when we do the review sessions to do is swap answers. If you're in a study group and you have other people that you can bounce ideas off, obviously you don't have the training or the guidelines that the markers have themselves, but you can swap answers to help with having a clear idea of what your writing style needs to be. You know, you can read something you wrote many times over and feel that you're perfectly good at writing because you're a sample size of one. But even just testing it with another individual, if you're not in a study group, test it with a coworker, a friend, a flatmate, your partner. Again, it isn't about the knowledge of procurement, it's about the ability to express the concept clearly, answering the question. And that can give you some rough idea of how you fine tune your own style, your own skills to get the most complete, accurate, and succinct answer possible.
I think it's a really important point. And I think just reflecting on what you've just said now and then on the question, I think as well, it's always going to be, and I think a lot of students feel this a bit intimidating and a bit, you might feel unsure if you're ready to do a past paper and you think, oh, I haven't revised enough, I haven't tried it. But to be honest, I would just say go for it. Look, get some past papers, look at what you've got, start from the base of the knowledge and the revision you've done to date, and just start to write a response. If you need to, if you find yourself getting stuck and you need to go back to your notes and refer to something, then this is the best time to do it with your practice because it's going to reveal to you where there might be some gaps in your knowledge that you might need to refer back to your notes and study and revise a bit more on certain models or content if you're not able to recall them. But it just will make it so much easier. The more you do it, the more you practice and apply the questions. By the time you get into the exam, at least you've had the experience of having to write out a response to a question. So, you've done it before. It doesn't feel like it's a hurdle that you're doing for the first time. And I think your point around getting your peers and your study groups, if you're in the study center, obviously you can speak to your tutor and talk about it in class as well. So to say, look, I've been doing this, this is my response. If someone wants to join, I think it's a great idea to get some feedback. Because as you said, Andres, you read it 100 times and you might think, yeah, I've covered everything. And just getting that outside perspective, someone might say, oh, maybe you could have brought in this part or this. Did you think about applying it in this way? So I think it's all extremely helpful and things. And I would just say, just start, just go for it. I mean, if you're practicing it, no, it's not a real exam, just go for it, get some past paper questions, try writing out a response. If you need to stop, it'll only help you because you'll realize in the practice rather than the actual exam that, oh, maybe I don't know that particular topic as well as I thought I did. Better have a quick revision or refer back to my notes and maybe some flashcards to help myself revise on that area as well. So I might move on to the next, and these are our final questions. And as I said, for everyone here, if you did join us a bit late, feel free to drop any questions in the chat if you have anything specific you'd like to ask, because I'll just allow some minutes at the end for us to address any questions from participants. What are some of the most common mistakes you've seen in CIPS responses or that you feel have come out in the marker reports as well, Andres? And how do you think students can best prepare themselves to avoid making these?
I think the misalignment with command words. I think people make the mistake of overextending themselves when the command word called for something simple and well, conversely have given a very short answer when they were expected to provide an analysis or an explanation or something a lot deeper. And so it's probably the first thing that I notice in pretty much every single one of the market reports that I have read. And the other element is, like we said, there's a count. Oftentimes, there'll be five concepts or three things or 13 stages or whatever. And yet, people seem to forget that there was a count. And so they provide three where there were meant to be four,
Yep.
or they provide six when there were meant to be five. Probably then one of the things you want to do for yourself is if you're facing one of those questions and there are very specific itemized things that you're supposed to deliver, itemize them. You can build the essay around, but itemize them. So you know that
Yes.
you're
Yep.
ticking off everything that you were supposed to tick off, right? And if you have a mental blank, that itemization actually helps you feel good about what you've been able to deliver, despite the
Yeah.
fact that you may not remember one thing. It happens to me all the time that I think of a list of things, I'll always forget the last item. So I feel a sense of confidence that, okay, well, I got these
Checked
things and
everything
I'm
off.
just going
Yeah.
to build my answer around the things that I know. Oh, that's what it was. And then I introduced the final thing that I was missing. And so the idea is keeping that count, keeping control of the command words, keeping control of the length, um, keeping an eye on your time. Now, underlying all of this, and I've said it a few times, but I'll say it again, you need to know the concepts. You need to understand the concepts. If you're not clear on the concepts, then there is no amount of fancy writing that is going to cover that up for you. And so you're going to find yourself just giving a bogus answer, right? So have that clarity of the concepts well in advance. The work that you do to succeed in an exam isn't in the 3 hours that you're in there. It's in the weeks before.
Mm, mm. And this next question, I have a view on it, but how important is the use of some of the procurement theories and models in student responses, and how can they integrate those more effectively?
If they're required by the question, then by all means integrate them. You have to remember there's two things at play when you're studying and you're preparing for these exams. You're preparing for the exam because you want a qualification, want to progress, and it's an intellectual quest for you, whatever the combination of those things might be. But these are also real world things. So I honestly, in the 20 years that I've been doing this, I have never been able to build a category strategy without some form of project matrix. I haven't been able to understand a negotiation framework for a contract that I'm working on without using Porter's five forces. So these are concepts that you're going to need in real life. Now, specifically applied to the exam, it really depends. If the situation calls for it, it shows that you understood and you can use them appropriately. But that's the key word, use them appropriately. Don't
Mm,
just throw in words to make your answer look fancy or to try to show you know something. If it's not relevant, it'll only take points off because it'll actually say, wait, this person doesn't really understand the question or doesn't understand the concept or doesn't understand both. So don't just throw them in to try to make yourself look smart or knowledgeable if they don't apply or or if you don't understand.
yeah, I think that's a really important point. And I'd say, look, if there is a scenario, they give you a hypothetical company with some facts and say, think about their market entry, for instance, and you think, okay, I've got some models. You need to apply it to the scenario. So as Andres mentioned, when you give your introduction, be very clear about, the questions asked me to do this. I'm going to interact with company ABC is looking to blah. This model could assist them and applied to their company. So where I've seen a number of students fall down or where I've reviewed their feedback and some of the mark report comments have come back that students give all the information in the world on the theory, they explain the model, but they haven't actually applied it or showed an example of what it looks like in practice. So just make sure you're reading the question, and if you are integrating those models, that you're able to apply them to scenarios, and doing those practice past papers and attempting to apply them is really going to help you there as well. I might move now into our final part. Again, just a reminder, if you do have any questions, feel free to drop them down. We did touch on this a little bit earlier in the session, but just around your mindset and exam confidence going into the exam. This can be just important as some of your theory and knowledge revision. So, do you have any tips on managing exam day nerves or mindset, or getting a bit lacking confidence as we're walking into that exam room 5 minutes before it starts?
I can't tell you that you're not going to be nervous, right? Some people aren't. That's great. I don't think I've ever met one of them, but I'm sure they exist. But the best way to not be nervous or to be the lowest level nervous is by actually being prepared. I firmly believe that preparation is the key differentiator from people who fare well in these things and people who don't. And it isn't just about knowing. You need to know. You can't bluff it, but it's also about all that logistical stuff that I mentioned, all that mindset. So being rested, having your coffee, knowing that there's no one that's going to come barging through the door, having your devices charged, your backups, your preparation for invigilation, all that sort of stuff. It just takes off a component of your mental load. You don't have to worry about it. You don't have to stress, is the computer gonna hit me with you need to download this update or install this update. You're not going to 5 minutes before you start the exam get a notification that your battery is low. Like if you've organized yourself, those other things that usually you have to think about, you don't have to think about. So you compartmentalize that and you've isolated that. And then going in, just remember, you know what you know. You're not going to change it in the last few hours, in the last few minutes. Cramming, if I'm perfectly honest, isn't a solution to a constructive response exam. It really isn't. You
Mm.
know, if you were doing multiple choice, maybe a quick skim through towards the end of your preparation might make a difference, and I emphasize on the might. But in reality, what you know, and it's there or it isn't. And you can present it or you can't. It's as simple as that. But just clear your mind, clear your nerves, um, get a good sleep, have you know, have had your water, all that sort of stuff, so that all those mundane, important logistical tasks are off your mental load.
Yeah, I think it's a vital point and kind of ties in nicely to my last question around long term, how students can build, not just for, obviously we do have the exams, we're hoping you can take all this great advice into in March, but even longer term for students who've got future exams, how can they build, I guess, maybe a plan or a structure for a kind of looking ahead long term, noting we all have a lot of life and work priorities as well, and things do often get left till last minute so that we can avoid that short term cramming that's not going to be as effective.
I think I touched on it before when I said these are real life tools. It's not the sort of thing that you take the exam and that's it. If you're taking the exam and never applying any of it, you've wasted time, you've wasted money, I'm sure. So these are things that you use in real life. I've worked in procurement for many years. I've worked my way up in the procurement team structure, and I feel that as you get towards the top of that pyramid, the more you need to know these things. It's not actually less, because if you think about it, if you're at the start of your career, you have an enormous team around you and above you of people who are all procurement people. And so they all kind of understand the language and they all speak the same terminology and they all kind of know what you're doing and why you're doing it. But as you move up the ranks, you're surrounded by less and less people who are procurement people and more people who are just business people. And they're great at marketing or they're great at legal or they're great at technology or whatever the case might be. But your ability then to be that subject matter expert, that person that brings the expertise in procurement becomes more and more important. So the mindset is if you want a career at this, and hopefully because you're doing this, you do.
Mm,
These are not concepts to be learned for an exam. These are not things that you're trying to just get out of the way to get a mark, to get a
yep.
pass, to get a stamp. You're actually building something that you're going to be using and is going to be a tool. It's going to be foundational to who you are going to be 2, 3, 5, 6, 10 years down the line. And I can assure you, when you get to the top, and from personal experience, most people around you, they don't understand procurement and they don't feel like they need to understand procurement because that's your job. And so at that point, understanding the very basics of procurement so that you're able to very quickly assess a situation, find the best value for a business and help deliver it and influence the leadership and influence the teams at the front line to deliver on those things. It's actually a part of your arsenal. It's a tool that you're going to be using at that point. When you're reporting to a CFO or you're reporting to a COO, when you're talking to a CEO, they're going to expect that you know your stuff because that's not their job. It's your job. And so these are lifelong skills. They're lifelong tools and they're career building tools. And sure, in a few years' time, I'd love for someone to come up with something better than the Qualtrics matrix or someone to continue to update Porter's five forces and that sort of stuff. That's great. These things need to be reinvented and need to be reinvigorized. But today they're really valid and they're very practical and they have every possible application. I can assure you, you will find a good use for them.
That's fantastic advice. Thanks so much, Andres. It's been really useful to have your insights there, and I hope everyone listening in here is able to take that away as well, longer term into your procurement career beyond just preparing for your CIPS studies and exams as well. I'll just finish up. We might just have a quick lightning round of questions where we both share our thoughts. The first one is just what's one quick tip you'd give to instantly improve a student's constructive exam performance?
Prepare. One word. Just prepare.
Love it, love it. Thank you. From my opinion, I would also say don't forget the syllabus. I often have students come back at the end and say, oh, this part I wasn't familiar with, or this part I didn't think I could be tested on, or this. The only things SIPs can test you on are what's within that syllabus and the learning outcomes. Be really familiar and look over that as you start your revision and say, am I confident across all these topics and areas? Can I respond to a question that would ask me about content in this area? Because that's all they can throw at you. They can't bring in random things from outside of that. So do make sure you're familiar with the syllabus. And final one, what's one thing you wish every student knew before walking into the SIPS exam?
And you either know your stuff or you don't. And so that now is not the time to worry about that. You know what you know.
I
You
think
hit
that's
that ground
great.
running.
I think I echo that too. And I say, just know the general admin around the exam too. Don't wait till, 5 minutes before the exam to be wondering how long the exam is or what the remote invigilation requirements or, that you need a blank desk and a clear room and a quiet space. Make sure all that's sorted well ahead of the actual exam as well. So you don't give yourself more mental load and stress on the day. Well, with that, I might wrap it up there. Thank you so much, Andres, for joining us, and thank you to our participants listening in. We wish you all the best for your CIPS exams in March and beyond as well. As Andres mentioned, if you're studying with us and you need content help, we have any questions, do feel free to reach out. We're here to help you as well. And I wish you all the best on both your professional study journey and your procurement career into the future. Thanks so much for joining us. Thank you. And thank you, Andres.
So